What's up, everybody? Hope you're doing well. I have this up on the screen, the discussion I had with BPF regarding deplatforming. I have it up again because I was thinking about some of the points that were brought up. It's like 2 hours long, so obviously it's a long listen, but for all you nerds out there with no lives or something like that, you could take a listen. I definitely had fun doing it. I think going on BPF's show, I can't imagine anything more fun as far as shows goes on the internet. So I know there's some other people I know that are trying to get on there. They should. I encourage them to. They shouldn't be afraid. Yeah, he's a very good arguer, but it's like, who cares if you lose a debate or a discussion? I think it's fun, even if you get tossed around or something like this. But anyway, I encountered a totally new way of thinking regarding deplatforming, dealing with bad actors, those that we consider to be toxic individuals. Now, I had always heard the argument that, we shouldn't deplatform to protect the First Amendment. You're violating people's rights. Others could, and then it's a slippery slope type argument, right? Which is definitely a concern. Other people could then be kicked off if they upset leftists or the people at Twitter, etc., etc. But I had never heard the argument that I remember that, fuck these wipers, man. I had never heard the argument that we should keep them on platforms because it helps negate their ideology, because then we can argue with them in public and expose them to counter arguments, and that'll help de-radicalize their followers. So ultimately this negates the fact that they're on a bigger platform and recruiting more people. And it's like, my initial reaction is certainly to reject this, but it's an important enough topic that it should be thought about and considered. So I was kind of like doing it in my head, It's sort of like an equation. What ends up being worse? Having toxic people on large platforms where their views and monetization is maximized, or the negative effects of the deplatforming and the potentially greater radicalization which occurs from the deplatforming and them ending up on places like Gab, Odyssey, whatever. And that's the strongest part of their argument, I would say, is what they call emboldening them by kicking them off, having them in echo chambers, which I certainly agree is the biggest downside to be considered. So I don't know, I was just doing it in my head. It's something important to consider, but I don't know, I still just can't get to the point where I would accept their premise that it would be a greater good to have somebody like Mike Enoch or Stryker's ideology and belief maximized, their viewership, donations, etc., that would somehow be a greater social good than denying them access to a platform, even with the negative results of the radicalization that can come from the deplatforming and the echo chambers, etc. Everyone comes at things through different viewpoints. I think debate is a useful tool. A discussion is obviously a useful tool, but I think debating such individuals definitely has limited effectiveness. It's sort of like having peace talks with dictators, right? You could talk peace all day. It's not going to fucking matter with somebody like Putin or a tyrant who look at those things like overtures. They look at those things as an opportunity to get concessions, etc., like a ceremonial type of event. I think somebody, like Thomas Sowell, Eric Stryker, they look at debate in a cynical way to get views, to get their ideas out there, to gain followers. Yes, I think ultimately you can sway some of their followers, but that pales in comparison to the new followers they would get, the increased publicity, and there are other negative attributes that come from, I'm less bothered by them debating on a platform because they're at least contested, although there are some negatives that come from that. But just letting them be on a major platform is the biggest negative, which outweighs everything, in my opinion. Would we rather see Thomas Sowell, neo-Nazi like Thomas Sowell, marginalized and in a small place where he has very little reach? Or if you think their argument carries weight, that the more he gets out there and the more his ideology is argued against, the bigger the positive? Would it be better to maximize his exposure, have him on network news talking about his ideology and having people disagree? Would that be better than him being marginalized with a few thousand followers on Telegram? I think the latter is certainly preferable, because when you put it in those stark terms, when you maximize the dichotomy, you can see that it's certainly preferable. I think these guys like BPF and I listened to a debate on Deplatforming with Synth, who's a totally legit debater. Like, I'm not insulting them at all. Like, I love their show and what they do and everything, but I do think they have this romantic view of debating where it's like Ptolemy's view of the universe, where everything was synchronized and perfect. It's like we just create an environment where the best ideas face off, and ultimately the best ideas prevail, and the bad ideas are vanquished and thrown in the trash bin of history. And it's like, I really wished it worked that way. I really do, but that just isn't the way it works. The people with toxic ideas that want to agitate simply view debate as a way to expand their ideas, get exposure, get out there, and just because somebody is wrong and toxic doesn't necessarily mean you can even quote beat them in a debate. Like, you could quote lose a debate to a flat earther because they know their shit and you don't, right? Like, the earth's fucking round, but if I debate a flat earther, it's like, well, fuck, I don't know, it's round, damn it. They have the photos from the moon. Like, can't you fucking see? Like, my arguments wouldn't stand up. Or even if I debated a creationist, I don't think I would have the arguments to win. And I get it. You would get an expert. Like, an expert on the Holocaust would, quote, beat a revisionist every single time because they would just make them look foolish. But you're not talking about objective reality when it comes to these individuals. You're talking about subjective vision. And they would see it as, they always see their views vindicated. They think Eric Stryker won every single debate. And even if they admit that he, lost the one to Destiny, they would say, like, oh, he had a bad day. Or, well, he moved Destiny off. Like, it's a completely subjective echo chamber type of worldview. So I just can't see their point where maximizing their exposure, or even not even maximizing, just allowing them access to the largest platforms, even the most toxic people that we virtually all reject, is going to result in a better social outcome than kicking off the worst people. I think they just have a romantic vision of debate and how it can solve our problems, when in actuality, the very worst problems they can't solve and can even perpetuate it. Like, debate's a valuable tool. Like, I'm not trying to dissuade anyone from getting out there and arguing. They should. But they should they should just have a more realistic vision of how it works. And I think part of my influence is studying revisionism and looking at how Deborah Lipstadt, who's a very probably hated person in the dissident circles, because people portray her as wanting to crack down on free speech because she says certain ideas aren't worthy of consideration or debate. She's kind of villainized and hated in dissident circles from what I've seen, and she is kind of like a cringy leftist, like librarian grandma type of lady, which is definitely true. But I admire the woman because when it came to revisionism and debating the Holocaust, I think her approach was correct. Instead of debating David Irving, who is a showman and a charlatan and isn't a truthful person but has an agenda, the way you defeat that, like, you could have a debate. Like, I'm not saying don't debate, but you don't have to. You can simply, she wrote a book criticizing his ideas, refused to debate him because she didn't want to give him a platform or even the honor of debate. I think debate is a very valuable thing, but it doesn't mean you should debate every single idea. Like, would we debate, should we respect children? Like, can we abuse children or something? Like, I would never debate somebody on that. It seems ridiculous. And then what? You would give that person attention? Like, there's all sort of taboo ideas that we wouldn't debate. And you can say, how are we going to shun ideas and not debate them? What if we end up shunning something good? Well, if nobody wants to talk to you because people consider your idea toxic, whether it's like neo-Nazism or World War II revisionism, I think the onus is on you to try to convince people why they should consider your ideas. I think excluding people and ideas is a part of getting rid of toxic ideas, preventing them from influencing the mainstream, and preventing propaganda from percolating into society. So, I don't know. I think their idea was interesting and made me do a lot of thinking, but because I want to get this right, I think it's a very important issue in a lot of different ways in modern society, but I just can't get my head around their rationalization as being for the greater good of society. I think they're definitely influenced by their love of debate and the romanticism of debate, and that it would result in a better social outcome. I'm trying to think what else I want to say on this issue. Like, you essentially can't beat these people in debates in the eyes of their followers. They'll only see the parts that reinforce. Like Matt Cockerell, he debated Holocaust revisionism with a guy, and from my view, he totally made the guy look stupid. But Matt doesn't know everything about the event. It's impossible to know everything. So the revisionist was able to bring up some like ridiculous point on the event not being possible because there were certain limitations in the stress that would be placed on crematoriums or something like this. And of course, Matt like wasn't aware of how to refute this because totally ridiculous statement. It would like be saying I don't know. You could do it for any historical event, like, oh, event X couldn't have happened because it's impossible for this. They wouldn't have possibly been able to overcome this limitation. I think it was the amount of wood that would have had to be chopped down from the trees, some like esoteric thing that no one really knows except for people that actually want to go engage with revisionists. Just some stupid objection. And of course Matt didn't know the details because it's some super esoteric thing that no one knows. So revisionists would see that and be like, "Oh, yep, you stumped him. He couldn't answer it. My ideas are reinforced now." So, like, I enjoy the debate, but I just see it as a limited tactic. I think the best outcome. There was a guy named like Mouse 42 or something that debated BPF, or really he debated synth, but like he had a discussion with BPF too. The best outcome for such toxic people that we all reject and don't want them to recruit on the major platforms is to uh, kick them off those platforms and go engage them on places like Gab, which, while isn't ideal, you're bringing ideas into a place where like everyone disagrees with you. So the only possibility is you'll change minds. Everyone's mind is against you pretty much. So you go there, debate them. You can change some minds to see the world as the way you see it. And they also don't have the opportunity to be on the major platforms where they maximize exposure, maximize revenue. I think this is the best solution for an imperfect world versus allowing them to be on the major platforms where reaching them is still very difficult because they're still in an echo chamber and tune out everyone that disagrees with them anyway. A certain percentages would be moved, but I don't know. I just don't see the validity of this argument to where you would say like, yes, it's a good thing. This is the best. This maximizes the good of society to have, Thomas Sewell and Politically Provoked in the place where he could have the most possible viewership, being part of an environment that creates a overall atmosphere of incitement and hatred for some people. Like, I just can't accept that this is what we should want, and this is the way things should be. I think it's idealistic thinking, relying on a number of mistaken assumptions that people are probably coming to these because they have their own experiences and they view the world in a certain way. That's how they arrive at these conclusions. Whereas if you have my life experience of studied things like World War II revisionism, the way you maximize the greater good is to not allow such people to have access to the masses. That's the way I think of things. But it was interesting to hear this very different idea that, honestly, I had never heard this argument, so I didn't even know it existed. So it is good to hear that, although certainly I disagree with it. But yeah, it's something that I would consider. It's certainly worth considering the downside of creating negative echo chambers, toxic echo chambers, where people can be further radicalized, and then also expose other people that are kicked off of other platforms. That's definitely worthy of consideration. But I can't see how this is worse than allowing the most toxic actors to have access to, 100,000, a million followers, where there's no check on the level of what they say or incitement. It's like, what's the check on someone's negativity and what they can do to society if there's no check on what they say and the level of incitement that they incite? Like, I don't know, it just seems crazy to me. I think in all these major platforms, there's always going to be a level of deplatforming because the public would demand it. Like this guy, when I went on BPF's show, he said, "Would you ban things like the N word or the K word?" And I would, because users are not going to want to be on a platform where, like, do you think LeBron James is going to want to be on a platform where people are calling him the N word or other people, right? Would you go on that platform, or would you go to a platform where people don't call you that? Like the First Amendment, the purpose behind it is to protect speech that's unpopular to the government, basically political speech, to stand against the government. So that's not being negated by preventing you from calling someone the N-word, for example, or a million other things. It protects you from government consequences, but people are trying to apply it to say, and now this is a very popular way of thinking, like I should be able to say whatever I want, whenever I want. But the public really doesn't want that. Platforms don't want that. Most individuals don't want that, even though they think they might. It's just the most toxic actors who want to say the most toxic things interpret this way so that they can have carte blanche to do and say the most toxic things and be protected by this misrepresentation of what the First Amendment is. Other considerations. Yeah, this guy was asking me what speech would I ban on a social platform aside from incitements to violence or things that were illegal. Well, things like slander aren't allowed in our society. Even if it's not a crime, it's a tort. And if you say something about some restaurant, the owner is he likes to molest kids and he has a dungeon to molest kids, that can be taken down and you can actually be punished for it. You can be sued. Well, what about the First Amendment? Don't I have a right to say whatever I want? Well, no, because that's not what the First Amendment says. So there's speech that's not illegal. It's completely legal. It can be taken down. You can be punished for it much more severely than being deplatformed. So this idea that the First Amendment ensures you a right on a platform or any other place outside of the public square is just an erroneous interpretation of what it means. You're posting people's personal information, posting slander. These are all things that are legal, but banned in certain ways in different places, and I wouldn't allow on a platform. Incitement, other such things. I mean, there's all types of exceptions beyond the First Amendment, like this guy was asking me. What else am I missing here? Yeah, they asked me like, what if they banned Israel supporters? Like, what would you do then? Well, you would argue against that ban and why it's ridiculous. You would say, why is nationalism for Jews banned, but Polish nationalism or Turkish nationalism isn't? This is logically inconsistent. You would argue against it, and I think people would be convinced by those arguments. So there's all possible ways deplatforming could be wrong or unjust, and you would argue in favor of finding the right balance, just just as we do for criminals. Like, we pass laws where certain people are fined or imprisoned or even executed. You don't get rid of those punishments. You try to strive for the right balance. And when you execute somebody, it's permanent. When you lock someone up, it's permanent in that they're never going to get that time back, and or are probably going to be irreparably harmed by that experience. But we still do it. Deplatforming is much less severe than something like that. So if you're deplatformed, you would argue as to why your ideas should be considered and should be on major platforms. I think this is a much better social outcome than allowing people, anybody who wants to come on, people that are going to purposely come on there and incite and piss people off as much as possible, because there are people like that. I think deplatforming is inevitable. The public would demand it. Twitter users would demand it, because somebody out there, Beardson or Baked Alaska or instigators, are going to come up with the most ridiculous shit to say to try to piss people off, to the point where they're going to demand they be deplatformed or they're going to leave. And then that's when deplatforming would ensue. So there's another long, rambly rant about just something I was thinking about and found interesting. So I hope it wasn't too torturous. Everyone have a good day.